Thank you for joining us today. I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. I know some other people will be joining, and we'll let them catch up with that. So my name is Diane Rohlman, and I'm the director of the Healthier Workforce Center of the Midwest. And we are very happy to be presenting this webinar focused on promoting health and safety among younger workers. This is one of our collaborative learning communities that we are hosting, and we hope we're going to start a good conversation on ways that we can protect this vulnerable population. And I'm very excited about our panel members who have joined us today to answer some questions about this topic. So as we get started, I'd like you to put your information in the chat, just your name and organization. We want to make this an interactive conversation, so we're also looking for questions you might have for our panel members here. So it'd be nice to get to know people, so feel free to add that information to the chat as we go along. So we have two goals today. First of all, we want to understand why adolescents and young adult workers are at greater risk for injury. We also want to explore what are the current regulations that can impact their safety, health, and well-being. And then probably the most important thing I want to have is I want to talk about best practices that you can implement in your workplace. And so we have employers on the call, we have supervisors on the call, we have people who work with youth as far as preparing them for the workforce with maybe a pre-apprentice program or through educational programs, and everybody plays a different role here. And so what I really hope you walk away with is an understanding of the risk and also ways that you can implement in your role to protect these population here. So let's start by maybe doing a little self-reflection. Think about what your first job was. Maybe you delivered pizza, you bagged groceries, worked in a restaurant, bussing tables, or you did landscape work, or maybe you babysat there. And think about what training you got when you took that first job there. Did you get any training? Did anybody talk about what the hazards are in the workplace? Or were you just told, just get started and here's what you have to do. So we know that more than half of young people are working, and by young, I'm defining that as 16 to 24. And many of those workers are hired seasonally as temporary summer workers, and that's a consideration we need to take into account here. Now, working has a lot of benefits, especially for our young people. They can learn a trade, they develop job skills, they become more responsible, and they may also be earning money to support themselves, or it may be used to help support their families there. But we know that young workers are at greater risk, and they're 2.3 times more likely to get injured on the job than workers who are older, who are 25 or older. In fact, if we look at the data, we find that this group under age 25 has the highest rate of occupational non-fatal injuries and illnesses treated in emergency departments. We know that many of these workers have died from a workplace fatality. And recently, we've had some different changes with our regulations that have been put into place to protect young workers. So some states, including Iowa and Arkansas, have loosened child protections to fill tight labor markets. So we have a need to have enough workers to do our jobs, but we also know that this group is at risk, and we want to find the best place to help protect them. We also know, if we watch the news, that we do have a lot of fatalities that could have been prevented. And what we hope to do is to start that conversation and work on addressing that. So why are these young workers at risk? Well, a lot of it just has to do with development. Up until your mid-20s, your bodies and brains are still developing, including your prefrontal cortex. That's one of the last areas in your body to mature. And the prefrontal cortex is responsible for things like planning and prioritizing and making good decisions. So we have a population whose bodies are developing and growing, and they may not have the same strength that they have. But we also have those differences going on in the brain that can make them respond differently to stress. We also know that they may not make good decisions there. So there are developmental reasons why they are at greater risk here and why we're focusing on them. Two other things I want to mention is one is inexperience. They may never have worked before. And then there's also a reluctance to speak up. So if you're not going to speak up and check in, that can make you afraid to say, I don't know how to do something. So many factors are apparent here, and we hope to address those there. So now that I've set it up, let me introduce our panel. We have members from the U.S. Department of Labor. We have Mary Lynn Almond, who is with the Employee Benefits Security Administration, located in Missouri. Maybe you can give a little wave. We have Jomahara Cook, who's with the Wage and Hour Division for Iowa and Nebraska. Little wave. And Natasha Welch, who is the Wage and Child Labor Unit here in Iowa, so representing state. And then we have several employers or trainers who are also part of our panel here. We have Barbara Aguon from the city of Portland. She worked with the Portland Parks and Recreation, and she came out of retirement to join us today, so thank you. Aurora Bihler with Missouri Works Initiative. Kirk Dighton from DC Taylor Company. Jeremy Lindquist from HVAC Training Institute in Des Moines, Iowa. And Krista Tedrow, who's the Director of Development for South Central Iowa Workforce Board. So welcome, everybody. And I am going to stop my share so we can see our panel here. So thank you for taking the time to join us today. Let's start with why we invited you to participate in this webinar and why you're hoping with this. So my first question for the panel is, do you have any examples of how young workers are at greater risk? And I don't know if Aurora or Kirk or Barb want to jump in on this. Go ahead, Barbara.
I'll jump in. I feel workers of this age really need our advocacy to provide a safe workplace. They're coming from school or have been away at school. They come back. They want to belong somewhere. And so they do what other people do. So if other people are acting unsafely, they may participate in that same behavior and end up hurt. Whereas when you're a little older and you're returning to the workforce or continuing, you get a better sense of like, hey, I could stick up for myself on some of these things, or what you folks are doing is going to end up in one of us getting hurt. So I just think we find them with a lot of peer pressure and wanting to belong that has them act differently than they otherwise might.
It's a really good point. I think, if they're going to be watching what other workers are doing and modeling that behavior. So we want to make sure we set a good example. Go ahead, Aurora.
One thing that I have noticed is that 18 to 25-year-olds now are way different than 18 to 25-year-olds when everyone probably on the Zoom was. So just the subtle differences. I am an elder millennial, right? But I had to figure stuff out on my own without being able to call anyone, without being to look up anything. And also still, I had a lot of hands-on experience. Whereas now I am constantly fighting with educators of like, let me get drills in their hands, and it's like, well, we have the simulator. And you can learn one thing by reading it, but especially in the building trades, unless you are physically doing it and building that hand-eye coordination and building up, how, just rhythmically how to do something, you're going to push yourself. If you were never there, like if you've never had experience with building a doghouse, building your own fort, because there's no YouTube back then, and figuring out that problem solving with the tactile learning, you're going to be thrown in a gang of a whole bunch of people that will probably be 30 to 45, maybe even 50, who grew up tinkering with their used car, who grew up fixing their own bikes, who grew up with that tactile experience that, whether or not they realize it, was prepping them for entering in, into the workforce. Whereas living in, like, doing all simulators, it's not the same when they're thrown into it. And therefore they don't have that same sense of like, oh, that's about to bind up on the drill, or, oh, I know that sound is when the wood is about to split and it's going to split in this way. And so that, I think, is like a major thing that I really don't hear talked about, that I think should be thought of more, or considered, or discussed.
Go ahead, Kirk.
I agree with everything that was just said, especially the elder or the older millennial. The young people that I see coming into the workforce today, lack of experience, the hands-on experience, the lack of the older adult guiding them through some of these skills. So we see a lot of inexperience, a lot of shyness. They don't speak up. Diane, just like you said, they have a fear of speaking up when something is wrong. And I believe that a good mentorship program in the workforce with younger individuals, including older individuals who are not experienced in our field, but younger people, I feel that they need some good guidance, some good mentorship along the way as well.
I think that's really go ahead, Jeremy. Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry. Just to piggyback off both Kirk and Aurora, one of the things you see is when a younger person comes into the trades, they've never stepped foot at an industrial plant before. They've never stepped foot in a powerhouse. They've never been in some of these conditions that, as building trades workers, that's where we work. And so I've noticed, just when I was in the field, even you go out to these jobs and say a first year apprentice comes in, they're more in awe because there's cranes flying around. There's a lot of stuff going on. And so to try to put that in a controlled environment is, number one, hard, but it can be done. And so that's my biggest thing is just getting them ready for the job site and knowing that there's going to be dangers on job sites. There's not really much you can do about it. It's part of the trades. And so that's what I kind of noticed with the younger people, is they've never been into these type of situations. So
I think these are all really important things that take into account with that. When I talk about young workers, sometimes I get a little pushback. An employer might say, well, I don't hire younger workers. And they're referring to someone under the age of 18. But as I mentioned, we know their bodies and brains are still developing until the mid-20s. And, that's going to have an impact on what they're physically able to do or how they decide to make decisions there. So how might you consider this when you're hiring or training workers? Is that part of the conversation?
I mean, we're in a place now to where technology helps a lot when it comes to the strength. I'm just talking about the strength side of things. So there's a lot of technology out there now. 30 years ago, there wasn't this kind of technology, so it would have been a hindrance. And you can also, just as Kirk talked about, this mentorship and understanding where a kid comes from, what their past is, and really, really digging into what they've seen in their life. And then you can make a decision on kind of where are we going to place them. With us, we have like 60, 70 contractors, all of them which are in the pipe trades, but maybe have a niche. And so if you can kind of pick, hey, I want to put this person over here with this contractor, because I know maybe they're doing a lot of HVAC work, and just that type of thing, just getting to know the kid. I don't think about it when I'm hiring anybody that comes through the door. We're more than willing to put them to work. It's just trying to find the right place for them is kind of where I look at it.
So it sounds like you're thoughtful in assigning what tasks they're going to do and who they're going to work with. Kirk?
Yeah, I totally agree with that as well. And we are considered to be in a high risk category. Therefore, we cannot. It would be very, very selective what we could utilize a young worker under the age of 18. So, being in a high risk category, we really couldn't work with them unless it was in warehouse, not running forklifts or anything like that. But that's pretty limited.
And you want to, go ahead, Aurora.
I want to say it's an odd place, and I think honestly it's depending on how much you have experience working with the current 18 to 25-year-old. On one hand, they'll be like, yeah, I want to hire them. I got into this trade when I was 18, and part of that is like, I think there's a lack of like maybe, and I'm sure there's studies on this, but adolescence has really extended to 21, maybe even to 25. And like our understanding of adolescence, like a lot of people are like 18, you're an adult. But what they don't realize is that has kind of been a little bit prolonged. And even through COVID, where a lot of the hard lessons of typical teenagehood that we all experienced pre-COVID, right, or decades ago, they're just not there. And so on one hand, they inertly know how to use computers. They'll figure it out. They have no problem solving when it comes to technology. However, the problem solving when it comes to tactile things and things that they cannot Google or YouTube are not there. And so that's where a lot of times they shut down, because the means of them figuring it out, if that's taken away by phone or technology, then they struggle because they have not had the experiences. And also a lot of times, like, yes, you are 20, but also you're a little bit of baby still, And so there's the extended adolescence, and at one point in time, you might have been considered an adult at 16, right? At another time it was 18. But I think often we kind of maybe are in this weird transition point, at least in the United States, in our culture, of where adolescence is truly, it's getting older, and that cap of like being a teenager is no longer being a young adult, but still being a kiddo with that mindset, and often still treated like one too. So there's not as much opportunity for them to learn independently.
Mm-hmm.
Diane, I did see a chat come through as well. Sorry, I'm not trying to take your job away from you, but I did see a chat come through that emphasized that young individuals today have a very difficult time doing face-to-face conversations, because a lot of their conversations are electronic with, they're doing the chat thing, and it's very, very difficult to have that face-to-face conversation. A lot of it is in my opinion, it's all in their upbringing, the home life. And as we see so much more, I don't know the percentages, but we see a lot of broken families these days, and it's extremely difficult. And that's why our young people need our attention, need our help.
Barbara, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important to have the face-to-face, and we have a safety committee, which is required in the state of Oregon, that took on our seasonal maintenance worker training and actually set up booths or little stations for people to go through as a group and learn how to properly load and unload mowers, riding mowers, and their equipment, how to use it safely. It also gives a good opportunity to define what they can and cannot use in the summertime. Our new seasonal workers, our newer workers, and based on age, cannot use like chainsaws and things like that. They have to be a full-time employee with additional training. So we've, like I said, we've used our safety committee to leverage creating an environment that they think is a good learning environment out in a beautiful park, especially if it's a nice morning and not raining, to take everybody out, greet them, meet them, show them what they're going to be doing, set them up with a mentor. So all these people leading each of these stations, I think we have 12 stations, also become their kind of role model go-to that they might see in the course of their employment over the summer and have an additional question. We have our executive management out so they know that this is important. This safety stuff is important enough that the director came out to say hello to you and thank you for going through this training. And I think just looking at our insurance rates, they go down at 25. That's based on loss data. However, it also matches the behavior and the cognitive development of their brains. So I think that's just another marker that tells us we really got to help these young workers until they're higher qualified and trained and then become a mentor themselves, hopefully.
Aurora.
I wanted to touch on one more point of like maybe why young workers might be scared to do something or nervous about speaking up. And I think there's another thing that often like I forget about, but I was kind of, once again, being that elder millennial, like I'm in, in a way I can understand both worlds, but raise of hand, how many, when you were a teenager, a young person, did you ever do something really stupid? Right? Everyone should be right. How many of you, was that recorded? Right? So there's so many fail videos. There's YouTube channels dedicated there's TikToks, Instagrams, all dedicated to all these fail videos and calling out someone if they make a mistake or if they do something wrong. I mean, even the kiddos, the neighbor next door, the kiddo next door was saying he doesn't want to get a job near where he lives so his friends won't rush in and then take a video of him while he's working. And I think that's part of like, you're going to be scared to take risks in certain things so you don't look silly. Like, that's something to work on. And the risks that we often took were unrecorded, right? So even though we might wake up in the middle of the night and remember like, oh my gosh, why did I do that? It's not on the internet forever. And a lot of times I feel like there's a lot of self-policing in that regard of taking risks or trying something and failing and going, I'll get it next time, instead of having this beautiful thing that you did because all the examples you've ever seen are really curated YouTube and TikTok and Instagram videos of how perfect it was the first time, when it's never. No one knows how to do anything until they're shown in practice.
So I'm hearing a lot of conversation about communication, and I want to come back to that because it's how we communicate with others, the ways we communicate, and that has changed with technology, and it also changes how we interact. And Pamela, I see your hand is up, and I'm going to ask you to hold because I want to jump quickly to talk about what are the current youth labor laws. I think we need to bring that into the conversation now. So I'm going to put Joe Mahara and Natasha on the spot here, and let's start with the federal labor laws. What's the current situation there?
Yes, certainly. So the child labor provisions of the Fair Labor Standards Act were enacted to ensure that when young people work, that it doesn't jeopardize their health, their well-being, or their educational opportunities. The Fair Labor Standards Act, or commonly known as the FLSA, and the Youth Employment Regulations that are issued under Title 29 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 570, establish both the hours and the occupational standards for youth employment. The minimum age for employment in non-agriculture is 14 years old. The FLSA, the Fair Labor Standards Act, what it does, it groups into two categories for employment purposes: 14 and 15-year-olds in one group and 16 and 17-year-olds in a second group. Now, when it's referred to the hours time standards, this only applies to minors who are between the ages of 14 and 15. And what it states is that minors can only work outside of school hours and only for a certain period of time. The general rule is not before 7 a.m. and not after 7 p.m. on any day except from June 1st through Labor Day, when the nighttime hours is extended to 9 p.m. They may also work in non-manufacturing, non-mining, non-dangerous jobs. And I want to point out here that any job that is not specifically permitted is prohibited. Now, you can reference fact sheet 43, which will be provided a little bit later with the details as far as the hours time standard. When the regulations talk about the occupational standards for 14 and 15-year-olds, this is pretty much saying the jobs that are off limits for this age group, again, are typically in manufacturing. They're also off limits in mining, processing, meat, meat processing facilities. They cannot do any baking, cooking. They cannot work in construction, including roofing. They cannot clean or operate power-driven equipment. They cannot load or unload equipment. They cannot work in freezers. Again, we have our fact sheet 43 that you can reference with the specific details as far as the occupational standards for this age group. Now, there are some exceptions to the exemption for this age group of 14 and 15-year-olds that would allow them to do jobs such as casual babysitting. They can also deliver newspapers. They can work as actors and performers, for example. There's another exemption, which is the parental exemption for this age group, which would allow the minors, if the parent is the sole owner of a company, to work longer hours, and then also they would have like fewer job restrictions. Please reference fact sheet number 43. It will provide a little bit more detail concerning the types of jobs that they can do. The second group that I want to discuss is those that are aged 16 and 17-year-olds. They may perform any job that is not considered dangerous, and they do not have no limit to the number of hours that they can work. The child labor regulations, they do not apply to any employee that is over the age of 18. So now that I made the distinction between the two age groups, in non-agriculture occupations, the Secretary of Labor has identified 17 occupations that it's considered to be particularly hazardous for those that are between the ages of 16 and 17-year-olds. Now, child labor regulations number 3 also bans 14 and 15-year-olds from even performing those jobs that are prescribed in the hazardous orders. Some common hazardous orders that are banned, again, would be in meat processing, in baking, lifting equipment, balers and compactors, working in roofings, or using power-driven equipment. Now, with everything, there is an exception from those exemptions. And this is only under very limited instances. So the ones that would potentially be have an exemption would be in the HO5, which has to do with the power-driven woodworking machines, the HO8, which has to do with the power-driven metal forming, punching, shearing machines, the HO10, which are the power-driven meat processing machines, the HO12s, which are the balers, compactors, power-driven paper product machines, the HO14, which are the power-driven circular saws, HO16, which deals with the operations or construction of roofs, and HO17, which has to deal with trenching and excavation operations. So these limited exemptions are for only apprentices and student learners, and they have to be at least 16 years of age and enrolled in this program.
So
Natasha, Mhm.
before we switch to state, just we had a question that what you have been talking about are the federal laws.
Correct.
Okay. And now Natasha's going to talk about state laws in Iowa.
So Iowa changed, Chapter 92 is where Iowa child labor laws reside in the Iowa Code. They were updated as of July 1st of last year, so of 2023. They coincide for the most part with what the federal standards are. Some of the main differences are going to be when we discuss the 14 and 15-year-old age group. Jamara said that in the summertime, a child of that age can work until 9 p.m. Iowa allows a child of 14 to 15 to work until 11 p.m. during the summer hours. They can work up to 40 hours during the summer. No overtime is allowed for a 14 and 15-year-old. During the school year, which is considered Labor Day to June 1st, federal standard is 7 p.m. with an 18-hour maximum during the week. Is that correct, Shamara? 18 or 24. And then Iowa is 28 hours during the school year, and they can work until 9 p.m. So there are those two main differences is with the hours. With the prohibited tasks of a 14 and 15-year-old, those did not change greatly between the Fed standard and the state standard. 15-year-olds were allowed to break out to have a waiver to lift more and also become lifeguards. And that is for those two types of industries. On the 16 and 17-year-olds, the limitations are still the same. Iowa has begun a new program for internships to be developed with some of those standards that are similar to what the feds had as well for that age group.
So a little complicated at times.
Yes.
So if you have questions about this, go ahead and put them in the chat. So why are these states changing the laws? Natasha, could you talk about that a little bit?
So it was industry driven. It was brought on for the changes of what the employers were asking for like for restaurants, for example. That's going to be your main one. If they had at 7 p.m. That's the busiest time for like a restaurant to have people going through. So that's where it feels that they brought on the 9 p.m. Curfew for them working for an Iowa employer.
So when we've talked to employers, hiring people has been a biggest issue. And so trying to address that concern there. So real quick, if you were an employer, this could be a little confusing. And I think Rebecca put in the chat, how is it that states can have less restrictive child labor laws than the federal laws? But if you were an employer, which laws should you follow, federal versus state?
Our office is
You should-
standard.
Sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. I was waiting for you.
Okay. Well, I can
office-
answer if you
Go
want.
ahead.
So
Go ahead.
the law states whichever provides the higher standard. I've heard some people tell the employers, well, do what the attorney will tell you, which in turn will tell you follow the higher standard. So whichever offers the greatest protection, that's the one that the employer would have to follow.
And if I could add here, Diane, I get this question a lot from a local level or a regional level from employers, as I'm sure Aurora does as well within our workforce system, especially ones that really care about young people, want to invest, they want to keep rural local talent. And so I like to use this analogy of, you've got like a funnel, right? And at the broad level, it's our federal government and they have these standards. And then as you go down a little bit more, you can get more restrictive or protective, if you will. Yet you can't broaden it at the state level. You can't make it wider, right? Because we're coming down and we're pinpointing it to a local. So that's something that helps me kind of understand some of ours laws in terms of what can we do, what rights do we have, and ultimately also, as I think Jamahara mentioned, she said, "Oh, hey, consult a lawyer. The lawyer is going to tell you which one is the most protective." So with that, as I've been having conversations with, for example, we had a conversation with a construction company, and they're, what can we do? How does that work? And so just having those resources available that are being referenced, and then also ensuring that employers are really looking at if there are any of those inconsistencies. And for us as workforce too, I think it's helpful for local folks to be able to respond to these things and point employers in the right direction. Because often I'll find if somebody calls a workforce office, maybe that employer doesn't know, or even teachers, right? Even educators in schools, districts, etc. So that's all I would add for that.
Mm-hmm. So I think, it's really important to know what the laws are and understand the risks, and that's where the attorney comes in. But now that we understand these regulations, I want to switch gears though and talk about best practices that you can use in your organization. And I think that's really important because ultimately it's up to the immediate employer to assign the tasks and to make sure they create a safe and healthy workplace. I think I'm paraphrasing OSHA here. And so when we think about that, what are some of the things that you do to prepare young workers to be safe on the job? Anyone to jump in on that? Go ahead, Aurora.
One is teaching them how to set boundaries and also how to stand up for themselves. And then another one is knowing the facts. So when it comes to mental health, when it comes to addiction, right? We have a wonderful resource, Dr. John Gall, who comes in and talks about not like, oh yeah, we've heard, but actual database, decisions and ways to combat some of the issues that you're going to see in the construction industry. But also too, how do you know what you can stand up for if you don't know what the laws are, if you don't know, why a contract matters and who to call if anything happens. And so who to call not only directly, but also if you're scared, what are your other options? And that way lining out so they are protected either by knowing the OSHA person for our area's phone number, or knowing, okay, in this situation, I need to call this group because I'm struggling with my mental health, right? So understanding and knowing where to call, because a lot of times, especially in the construction industry, there's hardly any websites. We desperately needed an update on that. So knowing exactly who to call and having those numbers, and also practicing standing up for yourself of like, no, my nickname isn't, Muffin. I will respond to Aurora, and just subtle things like that of like building up what they may or may not have. And especially with working with people that are old enough to be their parents. It's a weird transition. So
I'll go ahead and add on that. I think that was fantastic, Aurora. Having the name of someone to call. So like I said, I'm the safety manager, but I also was an employee advocate. And I also am an OSHA advocate, as weird as that sounds. OSHA is minimum standards. So in order to prepare our workers for the work they're going to be doing, a lot of it, being a summer camp counselor, is not in the OSHA regs. A lot of things for recreation is nowhere in the OSHA regs. We're a state-run program in Oregon, so there's nothing in Oregon OSHA or federal OSHA specific to recreation that's useful to me. So how we start them thinking is provide them an in case of emergency envelope with a little orange card and my business card to say, hey, we want you to think that you might actually get injured. And if you'd like to fill out this little in case of emergency card and keep it on you. It's totally voluntary, but it gives us the information in the ambulance, the information that you need to be treated expediently and appropriately based on your allergies. It used to say ice. We took that off during deportation. It became a very not friendly word anymore. In case of emergency, it's all spelled out now. So we have to also, as safety people and employers, be culturally aware of what's going on in our world and the impact that it might have on people, our workers and our workforce. So I presence that by just, hey, in case of emergency, who do we call? And then we also talk about just respect and dignity in the workplace, and really as a place to start, and that will get your backs if something happens. So in the Portland area, we had a lot of things happening. And there was not even just personal grief and loss, but we had collective grief and loss going on, which was quite honestly something I'd never experienced at the magnitude that we had, that was impacting like all ages, all generations of just cultural unrest. And it's been a tough years for these kids that haven't been in school. They had to learn online for a couple of years. And now we're saying, hey, no, really come back and be in person. It's uncomfortable for some of them. They actually like to be able to be on a computer and turn off their camera so they can hide. And it's just calling them out of like, hey, you've got something to offer to this work group. And we want to really mentor you and gain from you as well. And so I think it's just super, super important. Yeah, Kirk.
Absolutely. I totally agree with absolutely everything in our industry. And again, we're in a high risk industry, being in industrial roofing. With every new hire that comes in, regardless of age, with every new hire that comes in, we have a what we call a short service employee program. And it's a white sticker that goes on the side of their hard hat, says SSE, short service employee, which means you're brand new. And I explain that because that can kind of, give them a little stigma too. Well, I'm being identified, I'm being pointed out. The only reason that's on there is to keep you safe, because if you get into a situation where you shouldn't be at your training level, I can identify you from a distance. And that's also an ISN requirement of VETA, contractor pre-qualification. But we have a checklist of specific tasks and abilities to be able to pull that sticker off and then start into another level. So we have specific tasks and abilities, like I said, and we also have assigned mentors for these individuals. So it doesn't matter who it is, but also with that information, we stress on a daily basis that everyone has the right and the responsibility to stop work if you feel unsafe. And if you ever have a problem with that with the supervisor, here's my card. You call me. And I love working, especially working with young people, and mentoring is huge for them to be able to come into our workforce, be safe and happy and healthy.
So Kirk, I like the point you made that these programs that we're talking about here don't just apply to young workers. They apply to anybody who's new on the job site. And it could be, somebody who's older, who's never worked in the industry or never worked on this job site. So really having these policies and programs in place is important. I also am hearing about, during that onboarding or training phase, it's really important to make our workers aware of the programs and policies and what the resources are. And I also think that that's a conversation that needs to be repeated, because you're so overwhelmed in that first part of a new hire that you often need to hear that and be reminded of that. So
sometimes like drinking from a fire hose, you're trying to gain all this knowledge, but then the real training and the real learning starts out in the field. That's when they get their hands on it, and they need good direction out there. You can't just turn them loose, let them go.
Yeah. Jeremy.
So just one thing that how we prepare all of our, and this isn't just younger workers or anything, is in our apprenticeship program, the whole key is to put what they see in the field in a controlled environment. And so that's how we prepare them. We bring them into our training center where we have multiple instructors in there watching over, making sure they're doing everything safely. And then the other side is just creating the culture, right? The biggest thing is to create a culture where it's okay to say, hey, I've seen this before. I don't feel okay about this. What can we do to remedy it? The one thing that I've noticed with some of the younger people now, and we've talked about this quite a bit, is the communication side is not only were they not saying, they'll just leave, they'll just quit. And so to try to prepare them for that has been one of our biggest goals that we've had lately, is bring them into the training center, set up what they're going to be doing in the field, whether it be welding, HVAC, rigging, anything that we do out in the field, we do in a controlled environment in our training centers. And that allows us to make sure that, hey, if we see a kid, hey, you're not following the proper safety protocol, we can stop it right there rather than it hitting the job site and becoming more of an issue.
I wanted to add that when we did this partnership with Diane's grant for the Young Workers Protection Program here in Oregon, it was about 10 years ago, but the part that they really pulled together for us was online training on nutrition, sleep, basic things that you really want a worker to come to work rested and nourished. And a lot of times a lot of our workers just don't have those basic needs met. And so we find ways to fill that gap for them so that they can be a safer worker because they are rested and nourished. They are more attentive and aware of what's going on around them.
That's
go
an
ahead.
excellent point. And Diane, I'd be interested in that information that you have about that. We talk about that in the construction industry, especially if they're travelers, traveling around the United States. You take a young person, and our young people today do not have the training, the education, the basic knowledge of finance, for example. You put a young worker out on the road, out on construction site, out on the road for 5 weeks at a time, and they have financial problems, and we pay them a per diem, take care of them, but they seem to not be able to manage that. So, just the basic needs, the general nutrition, rest, etc. That's always an issue on the construction sites. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and so we have put some link to the online trainings that we've developed, and these are focused on the workers themselves, and that certainly they need to be aware of what's going on in the workplace. But I also want to emphasize that supervisors really play a crucial role, whether it's communicating and creating a culture, as Jeremy said, to encourage conversations and ask questions so that if instead of walking off the job, they stay on the job and they remain and become productive. We've got a labor shortage coming up. It's already here. We're already struggling with it. And we need to nurture these workers, and they have so much new technology, skills and ideas and enthusiasm and energy that they are so valuable for the workplace. And I think we recognize that. And there was a comment in the chat too, and I want to acknowledge that we want these young workers to come into the workplace here. So really good conversation. Shifting just a little bit, I want to kind of go back and talk about some specific groups of workers. We have a lot more of temporary jobs, which could be seasonal work, like with the park and recreation, but we also have those gig jobs, things like DoorDash drivers, or other short-term sorts of things. And I don't know, Natasha or Joe Mahara, if you wanted to address that.
Sure. I can start, Natasha, if you're okay. So the federal law bans youth workers under the age of 18 from driving on public roads. And this even includes working as outside helpers or on motor vehicles. this is specifically stated in hazardous occupation number 2. However, in 1998, Congress did amend the Fair Labor Standards Act to set the minimum age to 17 for on-the-job driving on public roads, and then allowed it only on certain limited circumstances. So they can drive cars or small trucks during daylight hours, and again, only under strictly limited circumstances. However, the regulations specifically prohibits urgent time-sensitive deliveries, and the urgent time-sensitive deliveries, which would include trips such as to maintain the customer satisfaction, to deliver a product, to making sure that the quality or the temperature doesn't change the product, or even incentivizes the driver to meet the schedule, again, would still fall under that definition as far as urgent and time sensitive. And I understand that the state law is a little bit different, but just please keep in mind that federal still would ban the driving on the job driving for minors under the age of 17. But the limitations or the special circumstances can be found in fact sheet number 34, and a little bit later after the presenters, this information will be provided to you.
Natasha, you want to jump in?
Yep. Iowa has it that a 16-year-old can drive for work. There is limitations between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. for no deliveries. They can be helpers at 16. It limits the 14 and 15-year-olds cannot be the one, they don't have the license, but also they shouldn't be on the road. Those are going to be the main differences. And then the delivery time, but it does allow for delivery now. So. Okay.
So the other industry I want to mention, and I know we have some people on the webinar who work in the agricultural industry. So you could just briefly touch on some of the differences between youth and agricultural work versus other industries.
So for federal, there are some differences, for off and on the farms. The regulations are a little bit more lenient on farm work. So they still, though, would have age limitations, hours, regulations, and hazardous occupations or dangerous jobs. But they are applied a little bit differently. So once a child reaches the age of 16, the child labor rules do not apply to farm work. They can do any work on the farm at any time. Children who are 14 and 15 working on farms would be restricted to work only outside of school hours for unlimited hours. However, they are still banned from working on dangerous jobs. 12 and 13-year-olds, they can work on farms outside of school hours, but again, they're banned from performing any dangerous jobs. They can either work on farms where their parents or their guardians work, or if they have written consent to work from a parent. However, children who are under the age of 12, they can work outside of school hours and non-dangerous jobs with parental consent, but only on small farms where none of the employees would be subject to the provisions of the FLSA or the Fair Labor Standards Act. There is a parental exemption that allows kids to work in any job on farms that are owned or operated by their parent or person standing in place of the parent. The examples of what jobs children under the age of 16 can do will be found in fact sheet 40, But typically, what they can do is they can work and drive vehicles on the farm, but they cannot drive on public roads. They can also operate garden type tractors. They can work with dairy cattle on the range and use ladders, for example, but no more than a certain height. I believe it's no higher than 20 feet from the ground, or they cannot get on scaffolds that are higher than 20 feet. Again, this information can be found in detail as far as the jobs that they can do, in fact, sheet 40.
I just want to add real quick that we had, because of emergencies like pandemic, and people couldn't go get food anymore, we suddenly had our workforce doing food delivery, which required driving. A lot of the food would come to the community centers and be sorted. So we had lifting hazards like crazy, ill-fitted equipment to do such a production. And then people using their personal rigs to deliver food all over the place in the neighborhood. We have a very robust defensive driving program where they have to take an online course or in person and be checked, the background check for up to the past 5 years. For these younger workers, that's difficult to get 5 years, but they can't have any suspensions within the last 3, and they can't have more than 3 convicted infractions, driving infractions beyond that. So looking to see, like, emergencies create variances in your normal rules and regulations, that as safety manager, you have to be, or a supervisor, you have to be flexible and nimble in those situations and have things that actually work without people getting injured.
So I want to keep us moving here. So when we talk about safety, we've talked a lot about physical health issues and injuries on the job. When you think about safety, do you think about mental health issues? Anybody want to respond to that? I see
I'll
nods.
respond to that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Me too. Yeah, I mean, this is a big push in the construction trades right now, between the mental health and any kind of addiction, anything like that. It's a big push right now because of, I don't have the stats right in front of me, but I've taken multiple courses on this. The amount of mental health issues construction workers have over, and addiction problems over a lot of the other work because of, injuries and long hours. And we talked about the sleep and the eating and all that kind of stuff. So when we look at it, it's changed a lot since even when I was an apprentice. This wasn't talked about when I was an apprentice. I've never seen my training coordinator when I was an apprentice bring apprentices into the office and sit down and talk to them like one-on-one. What's going on in your life? How's everything going? But I do it weekly. I mean, I have multiple apprentices that come in and, again, we keep saying generations and all that. It's, Kirk said it best. It's how you're brought up, where you're brought up, that type of thing, to where kind of determines all this. And so it's absolutely looked at. And now in the last 5 years, it's almost looked at on the same level. Just the amount of training that we do for mental health is probably just as much or more now as the OSHA trainings and the confined space trainings and all that stuff. So it's a very important, and it's a big focus, especially in our international, we're really focused in on the mental health side of our workers.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Sorry, Barbara, I apologize. I absolutely agree with this. And like you said, in the construction industry, it's becoming quite prevalent of an issue. This past year for winter training was the first year that we involved soft skill training for supervisors and also for crew members. And no longer is what we are trying to get rid of is that stigma that you're showing up with a copy of Kumbaya and a Bible. It's okay that you can talk about, I'm just having a shitty day, that type of thing. But what I also look at, and I encourage my supervisors, if somebody's acting out, somebody gets angry or frustrated, what's underlying? Is it job related? Maybe it's something else that's going on with them, and we have to take care of our employees as a whole, focusing on that individual and doing what's best interest for that individual.
So a
just
total
add-
worker health approach, you might say, Kirk. Yeah. Go ahead, Barbara.
That's perfect. We created a critical incident stress debriefing or critical incident response plan for parks. What we realized is that this age group of folks does not have our medical insurance. They do not have our employee assistance program. They do not have access to counselors. So aside from school, which oftentimes in the summer school's out, so they don't have access to those counselors. And still the resistance of people accessing psychological support is still kind of a weird stigma. However, my son, he's 33. He's like, Mom, our generation just wants to talk. And you guys, your generation, I'm 60, doesn't want to hear it. Don't want people to know that our family has a problem. And really got to my core of what he was saying. We do need to listen. And so if we had a critical incident, which we defined as, very traumatic, using an AED on site for a medical emergency, or more of the riveting criminal side of things, we would get a counselor out within the 24 to 72 hour window to work with these kids. I would get water, Kleenex, coloring sheets, and coloring crayons, and have those at every seat. Some people hate to color. Some people love to color. And you know what? I give them permission to color outside the lines. They just need permission to color outside the lines. And some days it's a scribble day, like you were saying, Kirk. So having something in place to support if someone takes their life by suicide, which we've had that happen of our young people. Collective trauma is very significant in those instances. So have a plan, because man, when it hits, it's traumatic, and you want to be able to manage those feelings and emotions of those staff.
I think it's important that we're ready for the incident, but we also think about upstream solutions. And that's some of the conversations, Jeremy, you brought up too, about talking with them and trying to head these off. And that communication is really key. And this group does like to talk. And actually, I love our younger workers because they don't have the same stigma we have. So I think that is another benefit of them. Aurora? And then I want to switch to Mary Lynn because she's going to talk to us about benefits. So
yeah, I'd say one thing that is often something that I've noticed in a lot of younger people is frustration, right? So if you already have lots of other things going on in your life, and then the frustration of having to explain that, no, I can't just go to the DMV because they're booked for 30 days and that's why I don't have my driver's license. And I'd have to wake up at 5 a.m. just to get a walk-in appointment for an office that opens at 8 a.m., right? So a lot of the frustrations of our generations and up, right? Of yeah, you just go get a used car for $2,000. You can't. There's no, so there's already in this mental health issues already that they might be aware of, they might not. But I will say this generation, though they may not have a lot of tactile skills, they at least grew up going on forums, talking on Facebook, talking on the internet to each other about what's going on in their lives. And so it's not the same of oh yeah, that's totally normal that, your parent comes home and, falls asleep on the couch and then doesn't wake up till they go, because they are aware of it and they are more aware of mental health and also the things that are going on, and they're not scared to talk about them. So one thing that I always find interesting is we have a wonderful therapy, therapy is included in our health insurance in the building trays a lot of times, and hardly anyone uses it. And it's you're the people that need to use it the most. Because the young kids, if you are doing some sort of behavior that they find very problematic or abusive in any sort of way, they're gonna leave, right? Before they stand up for themselves. But also it's about, I agree, creating this welcoming environment, creating an environment. And I can't imagine the frustration of being a younger person and knowing that we have resources to help ourselves to stop the generational trauma, and yet we really aren't doing as much, and we just think like, oh yeah, well, they're kids, they just get upset sometimes, and truly they are asking for help, and they try to look for help and just meet constant frustration when it comes to that in the workforce.
So let's let Mary Lynn, who's been patiently waiting here, because I want her to talk about what employers and young workers should know about their benefits. And I'm gonna
Absolutely.
pull up your slide while you're talking.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you guys. This has been so good. I am switching gears a little. However, what I'm about to talk about directly impacts safety in the workplace because the mission of the Employee Benefit Security Administration is to assure the security of the retirement, health, and other workplace-related benefits for America's workers and families. We accomplish this mission by developing effective regulations, assisting and educating workers, plan sponsors, fiduciaries, and service providers, and vigorously enforcing the law. So while my department is an enforcement agency, myself as a benefits advisor, I am constantly interacting with the public over the phone through website inquiries, even out at outreach events. And oftentimes I'm interacting with youth in this 18 to 25 range. And so I'm experiencing firsthand the issues that they're calling us about. And it is really important that young people know we exist, as has been touched on so much. I think it's toward the beginning of the conversation here. We were talking about how one of the goals here is to just share with young people what their resources are and who to call when certain things arise. And the reason that EBSA can help young people so much is because while they should first and foremost know that their employer human resources or benefits department is there ultimately to serve them, that's a huge misconception I feel that I get from young people is they don't understand the role of their employer in assisting them with their benefits. They don't understand that, hey, if I have a question about my 401k that I just don't understand, like, why am I not enrolled in it, for example, or why do I not see the right deductions coming out of my paychecks? Why is my health insurance not active? I've been paying for it. Why are these health claims not getting paid for my mental health therapy? Why did I get denied this surgery? I mean, these things happen and they don't know, first and foremost, that they can go to their employer. Their employer is there to assist them. And most employers are willing and able to do that. However, we do have some employers that are either they're ignorant to their role to help their employees with their benefits, or they just don't do it for various reasons. And I feel like because young people are more vulnerable, sometimes employers take advantage of that. Now, it was touched upon earlier that they may not carry their own health insurance through their employer because they may not be entering into the workforce yet. However, a lot of young people are still covered by their parents' coverage, right? Through the age of 26. Married or unmarried, you can be covered. Now, if a young person has their own children under the age of 26 covered under parents insurance, for example, that their children will not be covered under the grandparents coverage. However, that young person could be covered. And it's important for them to know that they even have rights covered under their parents' employer, right? So, if dad works for Boeing, for example, and this young person, age 24, has a major health procedure that they need done, a surgery. It's going to cost a lot of money and they're trying to get it approved and they can't. And they're so frustrated and they call us up and they say, I just don't know what to do. We walk them through, this is what you do to get this handled. We will help you contact your father's employer over at Boeing, their corporate HR benefits. Let's get them involved in finding out why the health insurance is doing this. These are things that they're happening behind the scenes, but they're directly impacting how people perform on the job. And I have noticed as I talk to young people, they can come to us very emotionally, upset, distraught, because they just feel like I'm banging my head against a wall here. Nobody's listening to me. I need this, that, and the other done. And when they come to us, you can sense their relief because they're like, okay, finally I got to the right place. I got to people who understand what I'm going through and they know what I need to get help with. And so that's really the goal of my agency. And so one of the other things that I really try to say to young people is, it's really important to know when it comes to your rights, yes, the role of your employer, but also the rights you have to written documentation, because we all know it's about what's in writing, right? At the end of the day, when it comes to the legal side of things, you want to see it in writing. You want to know what your rights are. There's the policy handbook, of course, which might speak to things about safety and on the job and all that stuff. But also behind the scenes, you have plan documents, which play a vital role in your benefits, including 401k, pension, health insurance, dental, vision, medical, short-term, long-term disability. These are also benefits that workplace benefits can offer. So we're telling people all the time, get those plan documents, know your rights. Also, we're also talking to young people in the high schools, college, and even trying to get out, even because I'm in the Kansas City, Missouri area, but we're trying to get out in the Kansas City metro to a lot of these trade schools and things like that to educate young people about starting to save early for retirement. Starting to set yourself up for your future now. I mean, retirement's a long ways off, but it doesn't hurt to know, the impact of compound interest over time. Time is your friend. These are things that might seem really basic to a lot of people, but young people, that might not be on their radar because, as mentioned before, if no one in their home is telling them, their family, hey, take care of yourself. Make sure you always have insurance. Number one. Number two, save for retirement. These are basic ideas, but really we're here to help young people navigate all of that.
So this was a great resource I didn't know about until we started this webinar. So I think it actually is one I would definitely recommend we all check out. And then we think about how we can promote that in our workplace to not only our young employees or younger employees, but also everyone. I do want to open it up now for questions from the audience, and you can put them in the chat or you can raise your hand. And I know some have gone by, and I don't know that I can scroll back through it and find them, but does anybody have a question or comment? Take a few minutes.
If I could, I'd just like to add, in all of this conversation, I think the most important piece is, are youth involved and are they part of the conversation, right? We build that efficacy, we build the opportunity to be aware and to create our environment, right? And our youth are oftentimes not at tables. So I just like to share a real quick experience that Ottumwa, Iowa, we were part of a group that got to go reimagine the future of work with Department of Labor. We're one of 9 communities selected to do this, and our young people were not allowed to come to this first convening. Yet I will say I appreciated the investment in local, but we were told we couldn't bring any young adults, and it was all about young workers, youth workers, and having their engagement and their voice. And so the first time we didn't get to take them, the second time we were able to, but beginning to really see that and involving our youth to go into boardrooms and have conversations to advocate for themselves. We passed a youth council provision that requires a youth in our city to be involved on the council, also on our school board, et cetera. So when youth have that space, it's just really important. So I would ask employers and anybody on the phone call, are youth involved? Are they sitting at your tables? We have a regional youth council. They inform all of our decisions. That lived experience is so critical and valuable. And we can learn a lot if we get curious and start to ask questions, because youth want to be part of the solutions. They want to be part of creating that future. So that is my piece, and I am done. Thank you.
I think a participatory approach is really important, and to have the people you're trying to impact at the table here. We did have one question from you, Mary Lynn, about what would you say to young workers who work with companies with 1099s and they cannot afford insurance on their own? And I don't know how to answer that.
Yeah, absolutely.
If that's long, maybe put a link in.
Yeah. So as for the 1099, any questions regarding tax forms actually is IRS territory. A lot of what we do here at EBSA overlaps the jurisdiction between the two agencies. But as far as getting a 1099 released, that's from the employer or from I guess that would involve a distribution on a retirement. It would be good I would recommend, if I were talking to someone, go to your employer HR benefits, say, hey, the service provider for the 401k or, for my retirement plan's not releasing my 1099. That's once again an issue that the employer should help to resolve. And then I'm sorry, what was the question? Second question, they cannot afford insurance on their own. Okay, so when it comes to the insurance options for a young person, first, if they first choice would be under a parent's plan. But if that's not an option, you have the marketplace, which is healthcare.gov, and then you shop for plans available to you in your state, which can still be expensive. Also, there's Medicaid, but that's based on household size and income. A lot of young people may not qualify for that, but it is an option for some. And then outside of that, you can purchase private insurance policies. However, I always forewarn people when shopping for that, it may be best to have the help of a broker who can help match you with a plan that's right for you based on your budget. But be wary, because Affordable Care Act laws don't apply to those insurances bought in the private sector, so they can take into account pre-existing conditions, charge you a higher premium rate, et cetera, et cetera. So these are things I'm sure young people are up against, because just because they're young doesn't mean they don't need health insurance, right? So yeah, and that's something we help people with all the time, is navigating those options.
Okay, so looking at the Q&A session, there's a couple of other comments here. When talking about why youth may be more at risk, such as things as developmental risk, lack of experience, and risk-taking behaviors, I think we need to stress the onus on employers to provide appropriate training and orientation, and creating an environment that encourages youth to speak up, ask questions, and be engaged in health and safety. So more of a comment, but anybody want to add to that?
I would just say again, is there a platform for youth to be involved? Because oftentimes you might say you want input, yet as we've been engaging with employers, our youth are even beginning to create a checklist of what does a youth-friendly employer place look like, right? And it was even as simple as having a committee or an advisory where you're gathering us. So is the invitation there, and is the mechanism there for youth to be able to provide that input? I think is just really important.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Another question is about pre-apprenticeship programs. Where do they fit into this?
I can talk about pre-apprenticeship programs. So we utilize pre-apprenticeship programs more for high school age students, and then maybe up into 20 years old, really. There's a lot of really good pre-apprenticeship programs. There's the building trade specifically has an MC3 pre-apprenticeship program that's been taught quite a bit around the Des Moines area. We have our own pre-apprenticeship program set up in several high schools in central Iowa. And what we're trying to do and trying to get the kids is learn the soft skills. Give them a little bit of, okay, when I step onto the job, what am I going to be seeing? What are we going to be looking at? How do I act? We've talked about the generations. I came from a generation of, for lack of better words, foot and ass. You go to work, you do your job, and you go home. That's how I was taught. And it worked for me because that's how I was brought up. It doesn't work for a lot of people, but they have to be aware that there's a lot of people out there still that's the way they run their jobs, and that's just part of it. And so we really focus on those soft skills and how to train the apprentices or the pre-apprentices on when you show up to the job site or to our apprenticeship. So the whole goal of a pre-apprenticeship is to link it to a registered apprenticeship. And so what do we want to see as a registered apprentice in our program? That's what we teach the high school kids. And we've had really good success and had quite a few students transition into our registered program.
Aurora?
Yeah, I run a pre-apprenticeship program. So you have to be 18 and up. And a lot of times depending on the year of when high school graduates, a lot of times I often have students that just did not do well with online learning and dropped out, got a GED, and now they're trying to figure out what to do. But I also have people that are a lot older, which makes really interesting when talking about songs, played at prom. I realized how old I am according to the Spring Chickens, and I'm not even that old. But it's imperative that if you are interested in the building trades and you do not have a family member or a friend that can show you the ropes on this, that you honestly, to go into a pre-apprenticeship program, to enter into the building trades to help prepare you, not only of explaining what all the trades are, but also this, when you say soft skills, but like really, truly, it's essentially like if you're doing an exchange program and you're about to go to France, right? Like you can just not learn French or not learn like any of their customs and get on a plane and go, but you're not going to have a very good time. And you're going to be freaked out the first time someone tries to come up to you and give you two bazoos on your face, because guess what? In the United States, that's not a big part of our culture. So with the stress of starting a new job, with a chop saw going on next to you, on top of not knowing who to call when your foreman is, calling you muffin or calling you even something even worse, a pre-apprenticeship kind of helps explain how all that stuff works. And I think it is imperative, not just for young people, but for anyone that's interested in the building trades. Because I myself I'm not originally from St. Louis, and I didn't have any family in the building trades, and I showed up like a stray cat, and I like made every single cultural and actual mistake possible. But I try to teach the program for what I would have wanted to know, what the rights that I know that were taken advantage of, or the laws that I didn't know, or even just how to file for unemployment, right? Just simple things. And that's what the pre-apprenticeship program is doing, is setting up a model. Like we use the NAB2 Trades Futures MC3 model that is from our own building trades internationals curriculum, and then mixed in with introducing someone that has never stepped a foot on a job site and preparing them for the world that they're about to enter. So,
Okay. Couple quick questions I want to get in if I can. One is a question about the riding lawnmowers, which I just lost here. What age can you operate a riding mower? And due to the limitations on driving, can they operate the mower on a road or trail from park to park?
So you have to be, no minors under the age of 18 can operate power-driven machinery. And so in parks, we follow that. And I don't even know if you get to if you're 18. It's a pretty, some of those riding mowers are pretty prestigious positions that people have worked years and years to get them. And then they stay for a very long time. So that would be something people could grow up into. Some of them we do drive over the road. They have to have the orange triangle. They do not go over 20 miles an hour. They, again, a very tenured worker would be having those routes where they would actually have to get on the roadways with other public transportation.
Okay, and I see Joe Mahar is going to respond via email too. Another quick question, I hope. When a worker wants to make a whistleblower claim in the Department of Labor, who do they go to? For example, if funds were misspent on a training or safety issue. And if you want to follow up offline, we can also do that. I don't know if any of our DOL people have an answer to that. We'll follow up offline on that one.
I was just going to quickly say it's not my department specifically or my sub-agency. I believe it's based on the law that's involved. I think it's typically filed with OSHA Wage and Hour Division or the OWCP.
Okay.
Yeah, we would need a little bit more details as far as, but if you I'll add my email to the chat. So if you want to email me directly, I can
and
get
then
the details of the specifics.
We also have a link put in the chat too. We will follow up with the resources that people have shared. So this is your moment to share resources. I'm going to give you guys 2 minutes to answer one last question. And this comes from, how do you reach out to workers who are out of school, 18 to 24? Do you have any good initiatives or idea to reach this group so that they know what their rights are and what to expect from the employer? Aurora, you got 1 minute.
Instagram, TikTok. Even if you're not good at it, if you have a little spring chicken that wouldn't mind sharing that information, it spreads like wildfire amongst themselves, but it's not cool if it's not done right. So you have the youth do it with the proper information and push it, and then their friends will see it and talk about it with themselves.
And I see
We
Kristen.
leverage, oh, I'm sorry.
Go
We
ahead.
leverage like a job placement fair where we have all the summer seasonal jobs that the school kids can come to. We make it handy and available in different areas of the city, so it is easy for them from a transportation perspective. And we heavily rely on returning workers from last summer. We're kind of on a 4-year cycle as they go to college, come back in the summer, go to college, come back in the summer. And so those folks can start as a camp counselor and work up to a supervisor over those years.
And I like Krista's comment about youth recruit each other, and I think I'm going to use that to wrap up here. The culture that we create in the work environment is the biggest selling point when we try to hire workers of any ages and to retain them. So recruitment and retention definitely depends on that culture. So creating a culture that promotes safety, health, and well-being, things that we've talked about today, is incredibly important. We talked about the importance of communication, you know, and the different types of communication. You know, technology has changed not only how we work, but also how we communicate. And we call it a generational thing, but I think it's more a technology thing in a sense of what's available, because everybody has their preferred style. And, you know, that can even vary between 18-year-olds or 30-year-olds. So knowing what their preferred communication style is can help you keep those open conversations going. So I hope today you're walking away with some good best practices. We've talked about different resources that the Healthier Workforce Center has developed and is promoting. These include activities you can put in your workplace. We call them Let's Talk activities. We have a policy brief summarizing many of the things here. We have a training developed for supervisors of young workers, and that includes, it is designed for agriculture, but if you swapped out the pictures, you could use it in any industry. And that's for not only employers, but also educators and parents. And then finally, we talked about the push training, which does give you a certificate for that. So quick round of applause. Our panel was fantastic. I really appreciate the time that they took and generated with us. As I mentioned, we'll follow up. We have recorded the webinar, so once we clean it up a little bit, we will go ahead and send that out to everybody who registered, and you can reach out to us or find it on our website. And we will also compile the resources that were shared in the chat, and you can reach out to me at any time. But thank you very much.
Thanks for your work, Diane. Appreciate you putting this together.
Yeah, I thank you all so much for giving us your time today.